And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain though, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 71 for Monday, April 14th, 2025. My name is Jason Olbourne. I'm one half of the Daily Australian, and as you know, the other half and the big part of our show, Nicola Charles. Well, if you are looking right now and realising that there is something odd that Nicola is not in her chair, well, that's because something urgent just happened not 30 seconds before we started to record today. Nicola's, well, her dog is giving birth right now as we speak, so she's had to excuse herself, but isn't it great that you can now recognise that I have a new partner in news today? His name, Dr. Christopher Neal. Chris has dedicated over 20 years to medicine, specialising in cardiology and patient-centred practice. He's a graduate of the University of Melbourne. He completed advanced training in cardiology in Adelaide before earning his PhD. And furthering his expertise, Dr. Neal undertook postdoctoral research and advanced imaging training in the UK. And if he's not busy enough, Chris is also the lead Senate candidate for the People First Party for Victoria. Goodness me, what a career and what a challenge he's got himself into. Dr. Chris Neal, welcome to the Daily Australian as our guest and now co-anchor.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I do thrive on spontaneous things happening, so I'm looking forward to the next hour with you.
Isn't it terrific? Well, who knew that you'd have a burgeoning career in media, just like the former deputy health officer who turns up on Channel 9, Chris? Who knows? There's a whole new career for you.
Well, all the world is a show, they say.
Well, absolutely. Now, well, before we get started, I mean, you've been out on the campaign trail. How are you finding things out there as you run for the Senate? What's been going on?
Yeah, look, this year I've turned my focus to politics. I've taken a month off practice, as busy as that is and as difficult as that is actually, just to focus and get out there and meet people. I'm working on my social media, which is a different skill set than I normally employ. But people in Victoria are tired, and I think they've clearly realised that the two-party system is not for them. So People First is an amazing party that started by Gerard Rennick last year, but really on the back of his tireless efforts and his really profound thinking about how this country and particularly its economy should be better managed for the prosperity of all Australians, but also with a freedom focus. And again, the name says it all, a focus which will always put people first. That's a pleasure to be working with him. And a privilege. So I'm out there talking to people, doing meetings. The next big meeting will be down in Wonthaggi, in Gippsland. So that will be Wednesday night on the 16th. Yeah. And really it's down to where the Victorian people are at in their thinking and how they vote. I think that we're working with really excellent candidates in the Senate for the minor parties. I could name Libertarians, One Nation, the Australian Citizens Party, even Family First has got good candidates. So I hope that one of those politicians that is putting themselves forward, that is not a branded major party politician that we know so well and we know to be, I think, ineffective, to be honest, will be sent to Canberra on behalf of the Victorian people.
Look, we certainly need to see some change in the country, but it certainly makes people feel confident when you can have quality candidates putting their hands up to try and change the political system here in Australia. We know that far too long we've just seen a trajectory that's just been this steamrolling UNIPARTY agenda that's got so many people just sort of just thinking it's out of whack, and then you go into this campaign where the politicians have finally declared that it's the official campaign has now started, which is to do with fundraising, and they immediately come out, and it's just pork barrel after pork barrel. The idea of we'll throw money at tax cuts, we'll give you like yesterday, Albanese a $1,000 tax deduction, which people think that's $1,000 in their pocket. No, it's not. It's an automatic tax deduction that you can claim on your tax return. So if you're earning just $25,000 a year, for tax purposes, you'd be on $24,000 a year, so it would return you about $150. So it's neither here nor there, but it's this idea of this being tricky with certain things and pretending people, $5 a week is the best that they're going to get. And what you're saying out there out there campaigning for people first is that the problems are a lot bigger than $5 a week, right?
Oh, absolutely. And really I think that the two major parties really don't have the independence and the boldness to propose real change. I've had a lot of experience, which we can go into more in the health arena, but going back and forth from Canberra. And I think that experience has taught me that the elected representatives that we send to Canberra, that by the Constitution are really meant to be governing for us, don't have a grip on the technical issues of government, and they take, as it is called, the advice. They take the advice from the public servants, the bureaucrats, and the bureaucratic system is a system. They're not accountable. It's a very large system, and I think if you combine our sort of standard politicians from the two-party duopoly and the really established bureaucracy, no renewal can come for Australia through this, because all they are interested in is perpetuating their power and their grip on Australia. They're not interested in beneficial, positive change for the average Australian. And there's very little coming forth regarding real tax relief, real relief of the massive burden placed on the Australian people by hyper-immigration, the real burden produced by lack of infrastructure. There is no vision for building the nation. When we look at our policies, just to touch on some of the issues I just mentioned, for a tax cut, what we have proposed, what Senator Rennick has actually proposed for years now within his 6 years as a senator, and proposed to the Morrison government originally, is to increase the tax-free threshold up to $40,000. That's founded on the belief that we shouldn't be taxing people below the cost of living, and the cost of an adult in Australia living is probably $50,000 to $60,000. So relieving that up to the first $40,000 being free of tax would put about $3,500 of extra cash in the wallets of working Australians, which we think is sorely needed and will help us all sleep better at night. So that's just one policy. Everything that is put forward has been costed, often with consultation with the Treasury Department itself, to cost policies. We believe in a whole lot of tax reforms. One of which for small business I'll highlight would be that the threshold for reporting GST would go up from $75,000 per annum income up to $250,000 annual income, which would remove a lot of red tape for a lot of people with a small business or a side hustle, making it easy to get ahead. We believe in the sovereignty of Australia. One of those issues is that all infrastructure should be owned by Australians, and that would be a massive departure from the reckless way in which we've been managed by, frankly, the coalition who have overseen the governance of most of the last 3 decades, and of course the Labor Party. So we need to own our ports. We need to own our rail, and we need to own all our major infrastructure, and we need to be able to build new power stations. We need to be bold. We need to build this nation. Furthermore, very interesting policy that we've put forward is the infrastructure bank. At the present time, when we build infrastructure, which by the way we rarely do, just for I guess lack of vision and courage in these days. But if we do it, we or the state governments do so by going into debt, by borrowing offshore. That means that that cuts us a really bad deal. And it doesn't need to be this way, because the government can raise bonds against infrastructure. So we propose a policy in which our infrastructure, which is sorely needed with a growing population, will be funded not by borrowing, but by money which we create for that purpose, and therefore own our assets in real terms and benefit this country again, building social capital.
They just seem to be such common sense policies, and yet they're so far away from the reality. So just to recap, a very simple policy of raising the tax-free threshold to $40,000 a year would put $3,500 back into the pocket of somebody on that amount of money. So just under $800 a week would be the income that you would receive there. But you're currently having to pay about $300 a month in tax. So, an extra $70 to $75 a week makes a huge difference. It's just so obvious. When you compare that to Albanese coming out and saying that you get an automatic $1,000 tax deduction, the thing is that anyone who actually collects their receipts might find that they would be worse off. It's almost like this little sleight of hand again from Albo, but at the best case scenario there, in that sense, a $1,000 tax deduction for somebody on paying 20 cents in the dollar tax is only $200. You're proposing $3,500 as a comparison, and again, fully costed. It's interesting that the People First Party is proposing raising the GST threshold from 75 grand to $250,000 a year in terms of having to report GST. Because if you're a small business owner and you're invoicing $1,500 a week, you're expected to collect the GST and go through that whole process. So what you're saying is that the cost of collection is more because you get rebates for the GST you've collected by the GST that you've paid, and so there's rebates there. But you're saying that the red tape involved in doing that collection is actually more costly than the small amount of money that you might save by the collection of GST. So by raising it to $250,000, it's saying any small business bringing in $5,000 a week just frees itself and just operates without having to have this overarching accounting problem. It's just a sensible policy, Chris.
Yeah, well, I think the policies are aimed at really benefiting Australians in every sector in a way that's fair and equal. If people are struggling in small business, whether it's rural or in the city, and they all need relief. And removal of red tape is more in line, I believe, with our philosophy than handouts. Handouts really don't work effectively. The removal of red tape or unnecessary regulation is the focus there, and I think that does make sense to people that I meet. It's an exciting bunch of policies. Look, in regards to health, that's my passion. And as a senator, just generally, I think the role is to propose these things, but of course. As a senator from a minor party at the current juncture in Australian politics, we're not proposing to form government. We're proposing to go and serve the people of Australia and to protect the people of Australia from bad legislation at every opportunity, whatever sphere that legislation is in. For me, I will absolutely be focused on accountability in health, the health of Australians and all policies that affect them. Certainly at the federal level, at the Commonwealth, but in state levels, I'll use my voice and my position as well. And if we've got any hope looking at the American situation with the Make America Healthy agenda that will be hopefully unfolding in a very positive way under RFK Jr., then we're going to need to translate that here. That's another thing I've learned, that we have a uniquely complex, I guess, architecture of health governance and different departments and different agencies. Some like the TGA are appendages of the health department. Others, like APRA, is really a much more difficult thing to define. A huge agency, which is probably correctly defined as intergovernmental, not exactly Commonwealth and not exactly in the state. But we nonetheless need to understand that health architecture and hold everyone accountable, because we are a commonwealth, and that, in my basic understanding, means everything needs to be done for the common good and for the good of the people, who, by the way, formed government. We, the people, through the Constitution, created government. The government didn't create us. But if you look at our situation now, there's no reflection of that kind of order of events or respect for the people, really, anywhere you look. So my main task is to reverse that, but by bringing accountability, by listening, studying carefully, and being data driven, and bringing to light, bringing to light things which highlight incompetence and a generally wrong direction setting at the government level, and to propose things which really are positive and authentically for the people, putting people first.
Look, it's absolutely fabulous. Now, what we're going to do, Chris, is we'll pause there, because what we're going to do now is give you the news headlines and a quick update for our viewers, which we're now broadcasting on camera, and our listeners, is that Nicola's just had to step away as her dog is just about to give birth, would you believe, right at the time of recording. And Chris Neal is with us here right now and will stand in for the balance of the show. And we're going to get into our news headlines right now. So in our news today, Labor and the Coalition have announced major housing policies on Sunday, each pitched at first home buyers and designed to get more young people into home ownership, with home ownership rates dropping consistently over the past 3 decades, particularly among young people. Now, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare says that median house prices have increased substantially and have more than doubled in some places during the past 10 years. So Labor has announced it will spend $10 billion to build 100,000 new homes across the country, which would be reserved for first home buyers. The party says it will work with state governments to find suitable projects and fast-track land release and planning approvals. The plan includes measures to help first home buyers with a 5% deposit to avoid lenders' mortgage insurance, which adds about $23,000 on average to a first home buyer's mortgage. A re-elected Albanese Labor government will continue to work in partnership with the LGBTIQA community to improve inclusive care nationwide as well. And that is another headline that has come out as we're looking at the election cycle. But if we go back to the size, the coalition has now also entered into the first home buyers with new home builds to deduct their mortgage payments from income taxes. So there would be no limit to the size of the mortgage or the purchase price of the home, but the scheme would only apply to the first $650,000 of a mortgage and only apply for the first 5 years. The coalition says a first home buyer with a taxable income of $120,000 and a $650,000 mortgage would save about $12,000 a year in higher tax brackets, and those in the higher tax brackets would benefit the most, obviously. Labor's scheme, by comparison, would be open to all first home buyers with the ability to pay a 5% deposit. Now, the coalition has proposed tax deductions, which would be available to first home buyers earning less than $175,000 a year, or $250,000 for a couple. Couples could apply but couldn't double dip, so they would combine incomes. The Greens, meantime, have already proposed limiting negative gearing and the capital gains tax discounts to one property only, capping rent increases and building more public housing. Labor has pledged an automatic $1,000 tax deduction without receipts for all workers. This is not the amount you would receive, but the amount you get to deduct outside of any other deductions there for free. So if you're on the lowest tax rate, that would equate to about $150 a year returned to you in your tax return. Now, I mentioned before that Labor will provide healthcare workers with training to care for LGBTIQA Australians, and a $10 million package to upskill doctors and nurses, alongside a new accreditation program. The Health Minister, Mark Butler, has revealed The election promise to be announced today would see Labor contract a training provider to design programs to train healthcare workers to give inclusive, culturally safe primary care for gay, lesbian and gender diverse Australians. The minister's office said that after the election, Labor would open a competitive grants process to choose a training provider. Nothing quite sounds like an USAID, an AusAid process, and I'm glad that Dr. Chris Neal's here because I'll talk to him a bit more about this after the news. It's a very strange story. Meanwhile, a lot of people in the US have been upset with the creation of this Real ID, which is not a new thing. It's causing meltdowns on both sides of the aisle, with Democrats bemoaning that it is a racist and the freedom movement fearing it is digital ID and a pathway to the microchip. US stock markets were expected to stage a recovery on Monday after Donald Trump excluded imports of smartphones and laptops from his tariff regime late Friday night. Shares in Apple and chipmaker Nvidia were on course to soar after tariffs on their products imported into the US were lifted for 90 days. The temporary reprieve was widely seen as a climb down after pressure from Republican leaders concerned that the soaring cost of smartphones would spark a voter backlash. US retailers import about 80% of their smartphones, many of them from China, which Trump has slapped with tariffs totaling 145%. And in another odd story appearing in The Guardian with a headline that reads, Australian academics refuse to attend US conferences for fear of being detained. So when academics fear travelling or partnering with US institutions, the impacts ripple through the entire global knowledge ecosystem, Dr. Alison Barn has said. When Gemma Smart received an invitation to attend an academic conference in the US, she was excited, but that was before Donald Trump was returned to office. Now, Smart, who has a disability and is queer, has decided it's too risky to travel to Seattle for the Social Science Conference in September. The Disabilities Officer at the Council of Australian Postgraduate Associations and PhD candidate at the University of Sydney will instead attend remotely. A stunning plot to prevent elected officials doing their jobs is revealed by studying the actions of lawfare used against council officials in Victoria. Council CEOs appear to be breaching their duty to hold elected officials in check, with fears of repercussions that they should not go along to get along with council objectives being the only way that they can survive. An elected official is meant to scrutinise the use of public funds, but when they do so, they are put through the ringer themselves. Aidan McClendon, the Mayor of Whittlesea Council, has been prevented from entering his office and from communicating with other councillors, among other draconian and unsubstantiated restrictions. Now, the details of this we will talk on a later show now because Nicola's not here, but the research that we have done behind the scenes is revealing a very, very cunning plot of council bureaucracy, where the madness reveals the cunning plot of control. And once we understand how the system works, we'll better be able to unravel what's really going on. Now, LETICIA James has been scrutinised over potential fraudulent mortgages on her properties. James apparently recruited her father to pose as her husband in order to qualify for a loan to buy a home. According to New York City Department of Finance records, on May 20, 1983, LETICIA James and her father, Robert James, took out a real estate loan from Cadillac Funding for $30,300 as husband and wife. Now, Perkins COIE lawyer Mark Elias has been named in the CROSSFIRE hurricane newly released documents. This week, documents revealed that by FBI Director Kash Patel that ex-British spy Christopher Steele had been hired by opposition research firm Fusion GPS to conduct his baseless anti-Trump dossier, and Fusion GPS in turn had hired by Clinton's 2016 campaign by now ex-Perkins COIE lawyer Mark Elias. Elias, Perkins COIE and the Obama regime then ran with the bogus document to spy on the candidate and future President Trump. Elias was the man behind the entire hoax that was focused on destroying the incoming US president. And of course, he's since deleted a bunch of his tweets. And US Immigration and Customs Enforcement has apprehended a Chinese national who was convicted of illegally operating as an agent of Communist China within the United States. On March 24, ICE's Enforcement and Removal Operations Office in Newark arrested 61-year-old Ming Zhang, a Chinese citizen who'd been living in Montgomery in New Jersey. Zhang, who reportedly under the nickname of Sushi John, now remains in ICE custody as deportations proceedings move forward. And that is the news of the day for this Monday. So, Chris, traditionally on our show, Nicola would be jotting down a bunch of notes and she would be coming out firing in that scenario. Listening to the news bulletin there, and realizing that we've just discussed the tax promises from both Labor and Liberal compared to your own, do you feel like People First has got the edge in comparison to this tit for tat sort of handing out money by Labor and Liberal?
Well, it is at least interesting, isn't it? And I noticed that that there's a sort of a blending of the issues of the cost of housing crisis facing Australia, in addition to tax relief. I was fascinated by the coalition suggesting that home loan repayment should be tax deductible. That is a massive departure in how income tax has been done, as if the cost of housing a family is a business cost. It's clearly not. I'd be interested in how they've costed that policy, or whether they've costed it at all. Um, but obviously things need to be done along these lines. They should be responsible. I'm a great believer in reducing red tape rather than giving a handout. In terms of the way in which Australia People First has, I think, I think a much more sensible approach to helping people with housing. We believe in massive reform in superannuation. Now, that's a long story. Superannuation's been with us since 1992, proposed under the Keating-Hawke regime initially. Now, it's certainly delivered a lot of Australians a good retirement sort of package. But what it was promised to do was to reduce the proportion of Australians on retiring onto the pension. And it's actually not delivered on that promise. It was just over 50% doing that in 1992, and it's 54% now, we believe. So there are other issues. It started off at 2% and it's been increasing, jacked up gradually to now 12%. There was never a referendum on it, which is really significant because this has not been voluntary superannuation. It's been compulsory superannuation. And in fact, you've earned the money. The government has enforced that be essentially taken into superannuation. And we believe that it shouldn't be compulsory. We believe fundamentally it should be voluntary. If you look at our neighbour New Zealand, in 1996, they had a referendum asking that question of the populace, and they answered a resounding no, it should not be compulsory. 92% said no, only well under 10% said yes. And yet here we are. So we believe that anyone with superannuation should be able to freely access that without restrictions, without massive red tape, and pay down their home loan. Now that is a policy which enables Australians to own their home sooner or get a deposit quicker. And it's plain for all Australians to see how that works. It's not a mystery. It's not that we don't want anyone to have superannuation. Of course, if that's the way you want to manage your savings, then that is absolutely fine. But it shouldn't be forced on people. And is a very good argument to say paying down a compound interest home loan quicker is a better long-term option. And that's something that Australians will now be able to freely make a choice over for themselves.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because if you have to take a home loan for 30 years and say you've borrowed $500,000, over that 30 years, you would have paid back 3 times that amount. So if you were therefore to be able to pay off that home in 10 years, you've saved, you could have saved $750,000 or something more than that and put that money somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, you have to earn it before you can repay debt.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say, Jason, your father taught you well, right? These are the kind of fundamentals of the banking and compound interest environment we live in, and these are the things we want to tackle.
This is look, it's really important, and the economics is what drives everyone. And of course, we've seen that the major parties think that the best way to do this is to offer you $5 a week across the board, and then have the other guy, if he offers you too much, then you say that he's fiscally irresponsible. But what you've shown us is that it can be costed to hand people $3,500 a year in terms of just raising the tax-free threshold from $18,200 to $40,000 a year. And the same way when you talk about home loans, etc. Now, the concept of Peter Dutton making home loan interest tax deductible for first home buyers for 5 years. Look, it's a creative policy, but it's not that creative. It's something that happens in the US anyway, and you can certainly do it if you are an investor. So technically what he's doing is that it's not quite negative gearing on the personal home, but it's just another way that is making a broken system become more affordable. It feels like kicking the can down the road to avoid the real issue, which is they're influencing demand rather than supply. What people are saying is that there's simply not enough homes for people to purchase, and that's why the cost of these are going up. So if you put that together, many people are arguing that immigration is fueling the fire. Why do you think the government thinks that it's okay to create, and the opposition to create these, fueling, kicking the can down the road in terms of financing, but then having this immigration influx of people that only adds to the problem? How can you fuel the problem and then so in other words, light the fire and then pay the firemen to put it out? It just seems that don't light the fire in the first place, right?
Look, it is unbelievable, isn't it? With so many hundreds of thousands of immigrants being brought into the country since the pandemic, and of course it was going on before that. It's demonstrable and not hard to understand how that has put massive stress on infrastructure in Australia, which is just not part of the deal for them. And it's very clear to understand how that's put pressure on the housing costs. If you go back to 2008 in the GFC, that was where we opened up Australian property to foreign investors, particularly those whose children were studying here as international students, and that probably kept the housing price up and allowed us to have a GFC without a crash in our housing price, certainly in Sydney and Melbourne, where we just went up. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and there's winners and losers in that. And I think now, well over 10 years, with so much immigration, so much upward pressure on the housing market, we and our children are the losers. So something has to be done. Immigration has to be curtailed. Immigration has been obviously, and it goes without saying, a massive and beneficial thing for Australia over the decades. But we believe it should be capped at 100,000 in absolute numbers per annum. And we believe that that those immigrants should be skilled workers. We believe, if you look at the coalition, they're saying it will be cut by 25%. That is not enough. And although both parties are talking about immigration as a problem, they're not taking responsibility for the way in which they've let this just go unchecked. And at no time have they asked the Australian people whether they think it's a good idea, which they clearly don't. And I'd add one more thing: is I talk to people of all walks of life in my job and in my travels. And when I speak to someone who's immigrated to this country, often with a real dream of building a better life, the reality here is not what they were promised. Again, if we're going to, my view is, if we're going to welcome an immigrant and take their money, then we should reflect that in the deal they're getting. That includes building infrastructure for them, and having a focus on building the actual infrastructure of the nation as we also build its population through immigration, and in many other ways. I feel that if you ask immigrants, including recent immigrants, whether they believe that we've got too much immigration, well, my experience is they universally say, yes, we've got too much, and they can see the results of it with their own eyes. So these things need to be changed, and that is, I think, a fundamental way in which the pressure on housing needs to be relieved.
Now, you come as a medical professional, and we've been talking about economics the whole time. Just in the news today, this particular story that Labor's going to provide health workers with training to care for the LGBT, etc. community in a $10 million package to upskill doctors and nurses alongside a new accreditation program. What is Mark Butler on about? Is he trying to say that the medical profession treats people differently in terms of their sexual identity?
Look, it is a fascinating issue. It's a complicated issue. People who have transitioned from their biological sex to a new gender identity is not a new thing actually in medicine. I've dealt with people who've transitioned both hormonally and surgically well before this has become a really prominent issue in the community, but always in numbers which are quite small. So I think that it's now a far more prominent issue, and I think that is I think there are real explanations for that. I think probably from the second half of the Obama era, and if we put that out, worldwide, that's about when a drastic shift in thinking came about, including in academia. There are centres of that sort of academic focus in Australia, which have had massive influence and are probably more than anywhere else in Victoria, and influence upon the Victorian government and the Department of Education with safe schools and various centres and foci of this sort of gender ideology. I feel that it is true that there is a massive pressure on people, and in fact pediatric populations, let's be clear, who feel they need to transition and whose families also feel that. So to answer your question, which maybe in a way you're not expecting, it is something that is affecting people doctors and nurses much more than it used to, because the issue is more prominent in the population who've transitioned is much larger. But having said that, there is also a growing population of detransitioning patients. So people who want to go back the other way. Now, I've certainly had contact with this group of people, both medically and socially, who feel like they were betrayed, that they weren't given, let's be frank, informed consent in a age of minority, and who want to go back the other way. Now, if there's ever a marginalized group caught in the crossfire of this whole thing, it's that, because they're disowned by their, I guess, transitioning transgender community for going back the other way, and they struggle to fit in for various reasons in whatever the other community is. It's complicated. I believe we're all part of the same community, and we should get on. We should have a human touch and compassion with everyone we meet, and that's certainly true of doctors. That is the Hippocratic Oath. In a sense, it all should work out if we hold to those traditional guiding values of medicine. But again, I guess I'm not fundamentally against education for doctors in this new zone, but I would say, well, let's educate doctors about detransitioning as well. And if we put that to the Australian medical community, my prediction is they'll really struggle, because they'll struggle with admitting the reality of a detransitioning community. But it is a reality. I've come face to face with those people, and they are hurting. So all medicos and other health professionals, we need to be able to care. We need to be equipped, and we shouldn't shy away from education. But the education should be robust, and we should, of course, be free to express our views whilst maintaining care and compassion. And we shouldn't be subject to censorship in any way, other than the principles of the Hippocratic Oath, to maintain, a standard of care and compassion, which is ethical. So you mentioned that they will outsource the education that they plan to enforce, and I can tell you, and we'll have a wager, it will be a nursing union that does that, because the greatest friends of the Labor Party are the unions, and the nursing unions have got a fantastic deal over the years, and they will one or more of the nursing unions will provide the package and make a whole lot of money doing so. Just like it was a nursing union that provided through a contract with the government the education on the COVID-19 vaccines. And believe me, that education was extremely light on, and didn't really provide anything like an adequate basis of technical knowledge for either doctors or nurses. But it is what it is, and that's the way things work. And I think that's what you'll see.
Look, very, very good analysis, Chris, and filling in the details there is incredibly important. I just want to sort of lean back on it. When you consider that the progressive movement, the left-wing movement, is all about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So on the surface, anyone supporting those in marginalised communities, the left, they get full points in their own eyes. But in this transition space and the detransition space, those that pointed out that children wouldn't necessarily be mature enough to make these decisions were literally hit on the head and told that they were the bigots in society. How dare they influence? And this goes down a pathway of conversion therapy, if you will, as one of these little areas. And the government, particularly in Victoria, came out very strong against conversion therapy to the point where they want to imprison people if they dare go down this pathway. But of course, the elephant in the room is what you just said, is the detransitioning people, those that have gone down this pathway, have changed their gender, have gone through physical adjustments, surgery, drugs, etc. In many cases, they have been made sterile and probably didn't understand that and want to go back to how they were. But of course, they can't, because it's an irreversible operation. You can physically alter what you're doing and change yourself. But if your plumbing doesn't work, it doesn't work. So you become a new person, sadly. So where I'm going, therefore, is pointing out the bleeding obvious that the progressives dismiss this, and therefore their DIA principled background that they believe makes them hold the moral superiority is now disclosed as being not true, because the political agenda is actually what's happened here, is that they're rejecting those that are detransitioning and shunning them from society, literally sweeping them under the carpet. So what actually happens is those in the conservative movement that may be for spiritual reasons or just simple due diligence are saying, well, actually, this is what we've been trying to say all along, that you need to tread very carefully, particularly when you're trying to influence children who are not yet of mature mind and body, that a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old or whatever, who's a tomboy or whatever, wants to change sex based on that particular moment. It feels like to me that there is not DEI at all, but an agenda to recruit at all costs. And I think this is the one of the elephants in the room. So given that scenario there, do you think that it is a process and it's slow, but do you think more and more people will understand where we are coming from? Because the idea is we're in an information war here. The Labor Party and the Greens are strict as you can possibly get. You anything you say against any marginalised community is offensive, and lawfare will ensure you will be told that you're a bad person and you'll be physically attacked or legally whatever. Where do we sit now in terms of this, in terms of the detransitioning? This has got to be a big issue. Is there any way, do you think, that this is an argument, or is it just too marginalised and this is the exception to the rule and it will just be forgotten?
Look, I think there's a culture war and an information war playing out all around the world in this regard. The most important shot fired was the Cass report, which you're probably aware of. I think it was 2022, and released by a retired paediatrician in the UK, commissioned by the government, who investigated, among other things, the Tavistock Clinic and its practice of surgical transition of minors. And the conclusions were many and were very unpopular among the essentially the Marxist academic elite that has pushed DEI. This is without any doubt the latest iteration of Marxism, creating new classes to protect. And the Cass report, among other things, just questioned the importance of informed consent, and questioned, I think absolutely rightly, whether minors could really give adequate informed consent regarding such a complicated, life-altering series of treatments, which include biological changes far beyond, let's just say with hormone therapy, biological changes far beyond what a primary school or a young secondary school student could conceive of at cellular levels and various other things. I think it is such a complicated issue, and I think that among other things, in my opinion, the paradigm that is used to transition young kids is not the paradigm which has been not the set of paradigms which has been used for over 100 years to transition adults. Now, that's not my gig. That's not what I do in medicine. But there's a transitioning adults is a whole different situation. And when it's applied to kids, it's at the very minimum, you could say it's grossly oversimplified. It's just, you're a boy, you want to be a girl. You're a girl, you want to be a boy. There's much more nuance to it, in my understanding of the actual developed field of gender transition surgery over the years. And I think it's fundamentally very high risk in terms of the abrogation of informed consent, and that really places the liability on doctors, because informed consent is an absolute cornerstone of everything we do. We're dangerous people if we don't have those sort of regulatory structures and boundaries and contracts in place with you, the patients. So I think we're in the midst of those culture wars. I don't believe Australia and Australian academia and Australian medicine and the 70 associations and colleges that really regulate the profession in Australia have come to grips with that reality, but it's playing out, and it's one of many things that needs close scrutiny, but it will continue to be a battle because these are really established positions which are very difficult for people to reevaluate, I think we'd have to say. So getting back to the detransitioning community, these are people who need a voice. They need our support, our compassion, just like all Australians do. And I think that people need to reckon with the issues that they present as well.
It's riveting when you examine the political process, because it seems that on both sides of the fence, and now certainly the left wing of politics, do not hold the mortgage on lifting people up. So here you are sitting on technically the right side of the left-right divide and saying, no, these are people that need protection, but seemingly excluded from the process with this Marxist approach that is a business of determining new classes to protect, which is what they do. So it's literally bottom-up politics. But what you're saying is that it's not just a system of bottom-up politics that the left operates from. You need to start the other way around. So what we're seeing now is that People First is emerging as a very balanced, centred party, because what you're saying is that these rules need to apply, yes, certainly in the minority, but in the mainstream. We've spent half the show almost just discussing economic policy around housing. So if that doesn't concern everyone, I don't know what does. Now, the thing about this culture that I don't quite understand is permissiveness within culture, that certain things are allowed to happen at any price at any time. It applies, as we've just seen, for medical. It seems to be applying across the digital space, that anything goes now in terms of digital IDs. It's a big battle, and tomorrow Nicola and I will discuss the real ID scenario in the United States that's frightening a lot of people. But at what point do we have to get to a stage that we need to be able to say, certainly in this country, that less government is better than more government? Why can't we seem to have that discussion, do you think, here in Australia?
Look, that's a really good question. There are a number of parties which claim to believe in smaller government, um, and we would be one of them. The size of the bureaucracies need to be reduced, and it's probably true at federal and state levels. And that would obviously reduce our tax burden if we were to achieve that. On the other hand, we're a welfare state. We've grown up in really good conditions, and we've come to expect a lot of things that used to be taken care of by the community or the church, the synagogue, are now taken care of by the government. And one example is the NDIS. I find it look overall. I'm not against the NDIS. I deal with a lot of clients with the NDIS under the NDIS, but when I find a client that's been disabled for decade upon decade and has knew what it was like before the NDIS and since the NDIS, what you find is that the different groups were providing care in different ways, and it was working. And fundamentally, the NDIS was set up with really good intentions. Came out of Melbourne academia, and it was about giving more choice actually to the people with disabilities and their families, and how to maybe position them more at the center of their care. And again, it's arguable whether that has happened for many of them. I don't know. But what we have had is you set up a system and it becomes a huge system, and then sources of bloat and bloat and waste enter into that system, and I think that is the NDIS. Again, we have a massive amount of disabled Australians. We have well over 500,000 on the NDIS, and many more who I think legitimately need to go on it, and they have complex care needs, but they were being cared for by the community through different organisations which were accessing funding, often from state governments and federal governments, through different programs, because that's who we are. We're a community, and we do care for each other. So what I think we're getting at there is that we come to expect the government and the federal government ultimately to pick up the tab on everything. And sometimes, in fact, oftentimes that backfires. In the case of the NDIS is such a regulated environment, has the massive resources, the multi-billion dollars, needs to be stewarded, and then it becomes an adversarial system. So people who want to apply for it also, they have to be scrutinized, and often they have to recruit lawyers, and so you add many layers of cost, and then you have people providing reports and assessments and care, often jack up the price, and there's bloat in the system. And at the present time, if you're a nurse who's worked for, say, 3 decades in the health system on shift work, you're probably able to earn more money and work less if you transition into if you hop over into the NDIS and offer your services, which will be greatly sought after. So, but these are examples. Overall, we've got used to the government, I think, too much, or become too comfortable with the many handouts that were completely foreseeable. And you see, you go back to the Roman Empire, it was, what was it, bread and circuses. That's a recurring theme. How do you, as a people, realize and come to really realize that that's not as healthy as it's jacked up to be? I don't know the answer to that. I hope that that adversity, including the adversity of the last 5 years, has taught a great number of Australians, hopefully millions and millions of Australians, that we need to be more self-reliant, and we need to send better people to Canberra who will just protect us from bad legislation and overarching control. I'll say one other thing about just pivoting off the Marxism of it all, and the way in which the LGBTQI agenda feeds into something which is free speech. it becomes one of the major issues where the freedom of speech is limited. And you've mentioned anti-conversion anti-conversion laws that have come in not only in Victoria but now New South Wales, and they are, believe me, just one example. The situation of free speech in Australia is absolutely critical, and we have multiple structures that have emerged, particularly in this Albanese government, including the E-Safety Commissioner and many other attempts to curtail our free speech. But I believe it's absolutely going on. It's a current reality. I was speaking to someone last night who knows that her free speech has been curtailed by the Karen, as they call her, the E-Commissioner, and most egregiously, Senator Ralph Abed is in the news at the moment because through an FOI, he determined that his influence had been limited by the E-Safety Commissioner on the basis of protecting Australians from his speech. And that is absolutely incredible. That is so dire. A elected politician in Australia should have parliamentary privilege and should be, if anyone's going to be protected, and we all should be protected in terms of our freedom of speech, it should be a senator. They should be able to ask difficult questions and express themselves without fear of reprisal or certainly curtailment. So this is a terrible situation. But lastly, the party that claims to be on the conservative side, the right side, the Liberal Party, should have fought for us in terms of free speech according to its values, according to Menzies' values, but it hasn't, and it has displayed zero concern as a party. We see the late last year and into this year, we saw legislation, bipartisan legislation, rammed through. They couldn't get the misinformation and disinformation bill, but the fact that Dutton wholeheartedly supported that bill tells you everything you need to know. And I think we only have a handful of people in the coalition who are elected who have both the mental ability, the competence to see what's going on, and above all, the courage to stand up for Australians. Again, we need to send much better people there who are really across the issues, but most of all have the courage to stand up for us.
If you're wondering why there is a rush of third parties emerging, some that have been around for 20 or 30 years and some that are emerging almost year on year, it's a direct result of the mainstream parties ignoring on multiple levels. But it just seems obvious, doesn't it, that if you can't have free speech, and in Australia we have implied free political speech, but it was Lionel Nation, who I interviewed last week on my other show, The 51st State, and he said he invokes the so what policy. He says, you say something I don't like, so what? If you do something, you say something else that doesn't fit with what I'm saying, so what? You've got a right to say it. You don't have a right to be able to cut this speech off. And Anthony Albanese, which just exudes this weakness when he says that he pines for the days of the 4 TV stations, ABC channels 7, 9 and 10 and the newspapers that all worked on a common thread, a press release, which basically implies that he believes the media works for the government, not the other way around. The media works for the people, just as the government is meant to work for the people. It seems that both are expected to work against the people like we're the problem. And I think, Chris, that it's appropriate, therefore, that somebody with your credentials, and we haven't even talked about heart health today or anything like that, but that you would work for a party, or you would choose to run for a party called People First. And if we only realised that that is all you're trying to do is put the people first of all persuasions, that it is the government and the media that is working against us rather than for us, then it's kind of obvious. And so your policies just start to make sense. Raising the tax-free threshold, working on an infrastructure bank, being able to choose how your super is spent so that rather than saving for a future 30, 40 years ahead, you can use that money to pay down your debt now and get ahead. It would be really nice if all of us could become an adult, or somewhere between the ages of 18 and 30, we'd do a bunch of hard work. And by the age of 30, we all owned our home that we would live in for the rest of our lives outright. And then we'd be able to get on. So as we draw this show to a close, Chris, if you look ahead in a perfect world through your eyes, how would you like to see the world looking? Perhaps, let's say you get yourself elected next month. In 6 years' time, how would you like the world to look from your perspective?
That's a really great question. In some ways, a difficult one. I think that I would like to see, I guess, let me say, I fundamentally believe that the renewal that we need in this country, which is both economic and social and many other things, needs to happen from we the people. We shouldn't be looking to the structures of government, which are increasingly showing us that they exist to perpetuate their own power and authority. We shouldn't be looking to them. There is rot in Canberra. I've been there. I've come face to face with it. People lack, as I said, the courage to change, even if they know that that the messaging is wrong. They know what they should do, but they will not do it. And the two-party system that we have is a huge part of perpetuating that. But the renewal needs to come at the level of the community, and it needs to come, I believe, at the level of independent media such as yourselves, community groups. It needs to come with new peak bodies. It's not something that people talk about much, but change needs to be data driven. A lot of the issues we face have a real technical basis, and while we get on with everyday life, the government is claiming an authority based on the data to go and do something which sets us up for failure, which puts us in a vulnerable situation. For instance, regarding energy infrastructure, renewables versus proper baseload power generation. We need new peak bodies. We need new peak bodies which will ascertain much better facts and supply them to much better politicians and the people themselves. That will increasingly show, and I think you can even look back already and see this, that the establishment elite and their politicians just sound stupid. They just sound stupid. They don't have the facts. They're misinformed. They can't deal with reality and facts and technical reality. And that they simply want to dismiss it. They'll increasingly want to dismiss it and say it's misinformation, disinformation, and that itself will show the people of Australia more and more of the reality that this is a control system, not a proper government which serves us. Again, the renewal has to come from the people. Now, for me, right now, the call to action would be that to Victorian voters and Australian voters in general, choose the parties which you think are going to put your needs first and have the courage to stand up for you and the truth itself. People First, I believe, is a really good option. And I'm standing in Victoria, but we need help. We need the people to help us out, because it's a huge operation. You know from your own experience, Jason, manning poll booths, handing out how to vote cards with a smile, of course. And so if people want to volunteer for me, they can do so looking at the website, which is peoplefirstparty.au, not .com.au, but peoplefirstparty.au. And there's a prominent button marked for volunteers, and you can give us your details and we'll be in touch with you straight away. I'm pleased to say we've got volunteers right across the 38 odd electorates in Victoria, and we will have a presence on the day, which I hope will be positive and draw people to the main message, which is our branding itself, People First. But I also want to highlight we do have excellent other parties that we are in teamwork with. We are working with the Heart Party in a joint ticket. So when we come in Victoria to the Senate, how to vote, and to the Senate voting ticket, you'll see that we're in a single column with the Heart Party. And that represents our synergy with them, but we're also closely working and closely preferencing with like-minded parties. We have great respect for the Libertarian Party, Jordan Ditloff's their lead candidate. So too the Family First Party, One Nation, and other parties. We believe that we should vote in a block with like-minded parties, and the preferencing, numbering 1 to 6 in the horizontally arranged boxes at the top of your Senate voting ticket, that we should be sharing that vote among principled parties who are really aligned to the values of freedom and putting the people first. And there are good options. And for us, that also means putting the major parties last. I think that's a message I have faith that the people, that a vast number of Australian voters have learned. That's a lesson that they have learned, that we need to put the people first and the majors last. So that's our message. I'm optimistic for a small change, a relatively small change now. That is, we're going to send better people and better senators to Canberra this time around. But when it comes to the next electoral cycle, I have a very strong belief that we need to take the approach of not stopping campaigning. We might be able to take a short rest and evaluate what's just happened in May and June, and lick our wounds perhaps, but then get ready for a hard slog of 2 to 3 years more campaigning. And anything could happen. We could get, for instance, a double dissolution. It's a very rare event in Australian politics, but we could get a double dissolution election. We could find ourselves needing to elect hundreds of new politicians again, and we need to be ready for that. Because I think a lot of the pressures on the people of Australia will ultimately work to the favour of those parties that are really going to demonstrate faithfulness to the core vision of what Australia is about. This place was started by us. We have a beautiful constitutional government that was designed by the people, and it should serve the people, and it just is not right now. Now's the time we can make a real change, and we have a real opportunity this election, but we can't stop in this election. We need to go forward. We need to present an absolutely clear option to all the people of Australia, both in the upper and also the lower house, for the next time around.
No, absolutely. Chris, well said. And thanks so much for standing in today, because for those that may have joined late, Nicola had to step out at the last minute to would you believe, just to birth some puppies. So we'll bring you an update on that tomorrow on tomorrow's show. But Chris, it's a whole new world standing up as a candidate. But if you want something done, you've got to ask a busy person, and your years and years of medical training and qualifications, etc., makes you more than enough credentialed to be able to represent the people of Australia. And I hope that in the upcoming election that we do get what we need, the great shift, and that you are sent to Canberra to represent us in the Senate for Victoria, and it will make a hell of a difference. And at the same time that Senator Rennick, who is your party leader, is also returned, because there are many, many Australians that would like to see the two of you work together, and to be able to develop on the work that he's done for so long, and work for the people against the system. It's been great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Jason.
It's terrific. Well, we are going to conclude the show at that point. Nicola will be back tomorrow, I'm certain, with a whole new update. We'll cover off on some stories that we weren't able to today that we promised, so we'll hold them over for tomorrow. But in the meantime, thank you again for your support, your fantastic comments, the information that you're sending through, and of course, keep blackpilling as hard as you can. We must get to the bottom of it. But as we've learnt today from our guest, Dr. Chris Neal, it's up to us. That is the only way that this changes, and ask ourselves the question, what contributions do we want to make in the upcoming election? And if you can, please support your party and get out there and hand out and just be amongst the people on election day to see how the general public really thinks. It's an experience of community service that you will never, ever, ever regret. It's one that you'll be able to build upon. And of course, we are what we think about, and the only way that we can change anything is by ourselves. On that note, thanks for watching the Daily Australian. On behalf of Dr. Chris Neal, Nicola Charles and myself, we'll see you all on tomorrow's show.